Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us for yet another episode of Let's Talk. Today we're looking at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 16, where Paul becomes practical about unity. From chapter 3, chapter 2, and chapter 1, Paul was talking about the theology and the theory of what unity is all about and a background to the problem. But now Paul is now addressing the issue of what you need to do to build unity. And there are about 4 sections in this portion of the letter. And we want to see what Paul is instructing us or teaching us to do and how we can apply those same principles to our lives. We can apply the principles of unity in our marriages, in the church setup, like in this case, or even in a home setup. So what does Paul talk about? Well, to start off with, Paul says, strive, make every effort to work on unity. He talks as if one works on unity. Unity does not come naturally. One preacher says, when 2 people come together, naturally they start going in different directions. They start falling apart. They start growing apart. And he says to be able to keep that couple together, they need to put an effort, to make every effort to stay together. So the natural thing is, if we are put in one place, is to drift apart. But Paul says, make every effort. So unity is an effort. Being together takes effort. Staying together is work that we need to do. So that's the first thing that Paul tells us. And he then moves into principles that are needed when we're talking of unity. Now, these principles, he says, be humble. He says, be patient. He says, bear one another in love. He says, be long-suffering. These are all attributes which are not attributes to emulate. These are not things that you look up to, you envy. These are not things that society highly esteems. These are things that people look down upon. When you are humble and long-suffering, people will take you as a mate. When you are humble and patient, people will think you are weak. But Paul says these very attributes, which seem weak, which seem like a doormat, which seems like things that the world do not value, are the very elements that are needed for unity. So if you are in a family setup and there seems to be squabbles and you seem to be drifting apart, take humility, take patience, take bearing each other in love, and try those ingredients. If you try and put those ingredients in that setup, I am sure your cake will come out well. Humility is respecting another person. If it's in the church, humility is appreciating that you don't know everything. That's humility. Humility is willing to sit down and be taught. That's humility. Even if you think you know everything, listening to someone else, that's humility. When we become proud, we won't listen to anyone. When we become proud, we become closed. We never learn. And Paul is saying to the church at Ephesus, if you want to have unity in this church, be humble, be teachable. Paul says, be long-suffering. There are times when you have church members that annoy you. I mean, just maybe the way they speak, or the way they dress, or the way they address and raise their children, or the way they do certain things. They might just annoy you. You find the same thing in marriages. Some people hate the way you chew when you're having your lunch. That's the way you grew up. But Paul is saying, whenever you rub the wrong way with family members or with church members, be long-suffering. Suffer long. Be patient. Paul acknowledges that the church at Ephesus is made up of people. People who are mortals, who sin, who fail. So we ought to be patient with people. He's talking about people who make wrong decisions, who make wrong moves. And Paul is saying, when that happens to you, be patient with each other. If we take those values that seem so weak and unlikable in the world and use them in our church and use them in our families, we'll be able to breed unity. Now from there, Paul goes on to uniformity of faith. He says we have one Lord, we have one faith, we have one baptism, we have one hope. Paul looked for like 7 cardinal points, which he said, let us agree on these things. These are very important. If we are going to have unity, we need to have certain areas where we agree as a body of faith. Now, definitely that's a principle we need. For us to build unity, let's have certain areas where we agree. One Lord, one baptism, one faith, one hope. Let us be united in our beliefs. Now, Paul doesn't list everything. He lists what is important and what is cardinal. Definitely, we can never agree on everything. Now, that is a practical thing. But Paul says, let us identify the areas which are core, which are pillars, and let us agree on those areas. If we agree, if we have unity in what we believe, if we have unity in our hope, if we have unity in our faith, then there will be unity in the home. There will be unity in the church. These are very important principles. And these principles definitely will help us as we worship together. Now that's the unity part. Paul then says, Christ went up, he ascended, and when he ascended, he gave gifts to those that were below, meaning those that were on earth. Now what gifts did he give? Paul says God gave some to be apostles, God gave some to be prophets, God gave some to be shepherds, God gave some to be apostles and teachers and evangelists. Paul brings out an issue of diversity within a united church. Paul is saying, God has given you certain skills and certain gifts, and he's saying we need to use those gifts. We are going to be united even in our diversity. An apostle is different from a pastor. A prophet is different from an evangelist. The way they think, the way they strategize, the way they discharge their gifts, the way they do their work is totally different. And Paul is saying, as a church, we have different gifts. And our gifts are there for the edifying, for the building, for the training of the church. This is similar even into a family setup. The gifts that we have are there to build each other, to bond with each other. Those gifts. We don't have gifts to compete one with another. No. The gifts that God gave you are there to complement your spouse. They are there to complement your brother. They are there to complement your parents. The gifts that God gave you are there for the edification of the family. They are not yours to be raised on a pedestal. They are yours to bless others. If you do that, there will be unity in the home. That's what Paul is saying. There will be unity in the church. When you stand and prophesy, when you stand and teach, when you go out and evangelize, just know that you are building and bonding the church of God. That is the role. Paul goes further and says, now, when we exercise our gifts, we grow. When we grow, we will not be like children who are tossed back and forth by the winds of different doctrines. We'll become stable. One source of conflict in the church is new doctrines, new false doctrines, right? Not new, false doctrines, false lessons, false messages. And Paul is saying a humble person who has appreciated that there are other people who are gifted and they've been taught, they become a wholesome person. And there will be unity. That is what Paul is saying. Now, how can you make that practical? I'll give you an example of maybe let's pick the role of women in the church. Now, this is a topical issue in my church at the moment. What role should women play? Should they go this far and no further? What should we do? Now, definitely there are people with different positions. Some say they should be ordained. Some say they shouldn't be ordained. What is my point? My point is, how do you treat the person who's got a different position as you? How do you foster unity when you lead a church that has different positions from you as a leader? Do you say, let's not talk about it, let's keep quiet about it? Do you override the other group? Paul says, when we have become grown up, when we have become mature, we will speak the truth in love. Paul is aware that when they are members, or whether in church or at family, with different opinions or different perceptions or different positions on a matter, people will speak the truth and they will try by all means to be candid. But Paul is saying, when we speak the truth, when we become candid, let's do it in love. Let us take away this attitude where we shoot people with the truth and say they will take the truth anyway. Let's not kill people with the sword of truth, but let us say the truth in love. Why in love, or how in love? In love, understanding that they are people, they've got feelings. They are people, they have a position that they have. Now, if you want to win them in love, you do not shoot them and tell them how foolish they are, how slow they are, or call them names. You tell them that they are circumcised or they are uncircumcised. They are conservatives or they are liberals, or they are this or they are that. No. Paul says you speak the truth in love. Actually, the phrase in love, bearing one another in love, speaking the truth in love, building yourself up in love. So Paul wraps up that portion of the letter with reminding the church that whatever we do, let us do it in love. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of His word.